If you've ever wondered what it would be like for Mr. X to gain sentience and a thirst for Resident Evil 3 Remake has you covered. I do my best to avoid putting expectations on experiences before starting and take them as they are, but the hype for Nemesis was astronomical leading up to the release as the evolution of Mr. X. For more on the Jolly Pale Punisher, check out my boss ranking of Resident Evil 2 Remake. With that in mind, I'm going to try to avoid constant comparisons between Tyrant and Nemesis. Though the remakes are only a year apart in terms of release, the goals they wanted to accomplish are clearly different. Resident Evil 2 was a delight for fans of open-ended level design full of rich puzzles, optional rewards for diligent exploration, and slow-paced horrors around every well-crafted corner. Resident Evil 3 pushes the throttle into high gear from the very start into a progressively more action-oriented experience that puts combat at the forefront. It provides bombastic battles with an arch-rival framed through escalating encounters with a menagerie of lesser horrors from a lens of two highly compelling characters, Jill Valentine and Carlos Oliveira. While it may be brief and leave puzzles on the back burner in favor of zombie warfare, it uses this focus to its strength, culminating in regular clashes with Nemesis. Those fights will be the center of today's video centered on his quality. Without further ado, here are the Resident Evil 3 bosses ranked from Nemesis to Nemesis. Number 6, Nemesis the Blob. Having the final boss at the bottom tips the hat of his evolutionary destination, so let's come out and say it. The once imposing terror that is introduced as a slasher villain like Titan in the opening hours devolves into a senseless amalgamation of slop, much like the Birkin Stage 1 humanoid presence becoming predatory wallpaper in the end of Resident Evil 2. Like G5 and the similarly ranked Alligator, Nemesis the Blob is more spectacle than a mechanically rich showdown. Of this trio, however, Blob Nemi is the most compelling in that regard. You start off by using the Take a Hint beam to give him a more upfront showcase of Jill's feelings. Unfortunately, her disdain for this undying predator shorts its circuits, forcing you to push a few canisters in place to charge it again. This is where the actual fight comes into play. Throughout the skin landscape, there are red orbs that all but shout their nature as a weak point. Blast the pairs on each side and you'll stun the blob, giving you time to push the canisters into place. I believe the time you have to do this varies based on difficulty, but doing my typical normal difficulty run for boss rankings made this easier than I expected. He does swing his flesh sticks at you and spew some acid, but they stock you to the brim with healing ahead of time, so it's easy to ignore. It does at least prevent you from pushing in the canisters without stunning him, but on standard, I only needed one stun to get all three set. After that, you shove the beam down his gullet and show him stars one final time. It is extremely satisfying giving him the business so hard you can see the after effects burn far beyond his remains after all you've been through. Though I have to admit, getting to do a glorified QuickTime event to do so is a minor disappointment. Cinematics sometimes require things like this to be more on rails, and in many cases I don't have a problem with that. But when you mix it in with the very basic design of the fight requiring minimal strategy or any taxing action from the player, it gives a slightly more hollow feeling, especially when you consider how often the game takes the reins out of the player's hands during many of the later Nemesis encounters for the sake of cinematics. While there are things to appreciate about the Blob, even to the point I would say this is actually a solid boss fight, it's by my measure the worst of the Nemesis encounters. Number 5, Feral Nemesis. I alluded to it a tiny bit in the last entry, but while the Blob is a somewhat disappointing endpoint, Feral Nemi is where the scales tip in the wrong direction visually. I really enjoyed Birkin's descent from a pain beast to a menacing monster to an all-consuming garbage disposal of guts, but I feel it didn't make as much sense in the case of Nemesis. As I'll later share, part of what makes Nemesis so terrifying is his rising intelligence throughout the first few encounters. My choice to title his second stage Feral is to represent where I feel this went wrong, turning this cold-blooded yet calculated force of nature into a wild animal, not only in appearance, but in mechanics. The doggo will do laps around the arena, running on the walls for a generously long time in a mindless manner. This segment is so transparently intended for you to make use of the new mine rounds you just got for your grenade launcher that it almost feels scripted. When he's not running around on the walls, he swings at you or jumps at you. Both are well telegraphed and allow you to make easy use of the new dodge mechanic. While I was begging for something like this in the case of Resident Evil 2 Super Tyrant, it serves to make this fight overly easy. He does later add in a twirl to at least shake things up a bit, and the pounces from the wall runs can catch you napping as well, but the main challenge here is keeping up with his gargantuan health pool. Granted, I had limited pouch space and opted to leave the grenade launcher boxed, a foolish choice considering the game tells you escape the monster is your next objective, so I won't fault it for my ignorance. Still, the amount of ammo to down him felt absurd even considering the weaker tools I used. The ammo spread generously throughout the arena indicates it's meant to go on for quite a while. I have no problem with lengthy fights inherently, but when his moveset is so simple, it makes it pretty dull and punishing if you somehow do get hit enough to have to start all over. I also have to mention that the lead and chase feels extremely scripted, which would normally be fine. I praise the Gator for the same thing due to the tense value it offers for first timers in a game trying to create a terrifying atmosphere. The problem is that there have been so many of these cinematic sequences that boil down to hold the stick and move forward that it began to wear thin by this point. I realize I'm pushing a lot of criticism on this fight, and while I do believe it's warranted, I don't want to ignore how fun it is. Despite the simple moveset, girthy health pool, and lackluster lead-in, it's still immensely entertaining juking a beast and firing away with your arsenal. Though I never got to try blasting him off the wall with mines, I bet it is pretty fun. The expectations of you here are more involved than the Blob, which I also appreciate. That said, I still found myself underwhelmed during my first and only battle for all the aforementioned reasons, enough to land him just barely above the bottom spot. Number 4, Noodle Nemesis. It's a complaint that is soon to be addressed by the game itself, so forgive me for reinforcing it one more time. Before your Noodly Nem battle begins, you're met with more encounters that are entirely cutscene based. Even if they revamp this sequence to be you running away and pressing a button in a short 10-second sprint, it would add the surprise of Nemesis popping in, tension, and player agency that a cutscene can't deliver. They even follow it with a crawl away from him that does give you some input, but it is quite literally only holding the stick forward. It's on the screen, for crying out loud. It may seem silly to complain I want involvement than complain when I get it. It's definitely better, but I think for the length of the game, they could have done more to make these sequences involved. As for the boss himself, it's essentially Feral Nemesis slapping you with a pool noodle. A pool noodle that reaches across time, space, and Jill's face to beat your health down. The range and speed made it difficult to dodge, but I liked that he felt like a legitimate threat because of it. I also enjoyed the mechanics layered in. Like Feral, Noodle Nemesis runs on the walls, but this time he'll stop on or behind numbered tanks that Carlos calls out for you. If you're quick draw McGraw, you'll be rewarded by hitting the correct tank with a shock and then a stun on the boss. This is valuable, but I have to say, it seemed pretty easy to stun him with grenade launcher spam anyway. Like Feral, he's extremely tanky, and the many cycles of him running on tanks can take a toll on your health this time around thanks to his accurate attacks. He'll also call in basic zombies periodically, but there's so much firepower around that they really aren't much of a factor. The expectation to win felt the highest in this fight of any in the game for me, but it didn't feel balanced in a poor way. I quite like the fight, though I do think the noodle range is a bit much, and his ability to be stunned by you could have been toned down. I also really dislike the zombification of player engagement in the run from Nemesis cutscenes that have worn thin by this point, but you do at least get a hearty battle to remedy that. Though he misses out on the top half, Noodle Nemesis is handily my favorite of the later stages in the game. Number 3, Rocket Nemesis. Though convention would say there are only 4 traditional Nemesis boss battles in Resident Evil 3, I think it's important to recognize the value in the 2 other Nemesis encounters and how they create an instant dramatic upheaval in the game's rhythm. Rocket Nemesis may not be in the spotlight for long, but while he is around, he commands complete attention and quick twitch decisions from the player. Making use of the shimmy, you're forced into a chase with laser targeted rockets you need to bait and evade, all while keeping your movement deliberate to avoid zombies, use environmental tools like shock generators and explosive barrels at key moments, and just when you get comfortable, he hops in your face for a point blank blast. This is a perfect example of what I wanted when I criticized the cinematic chases earlier. This isn't an insanely complicated setup. You move through a path already traveled and avoid laser targeted rockets while doing so. Their pressure makes the normal dangers of Raccoon City more potent and adds perfect tension to a genre that benefits from it. There's even large set piece moments that are tipped off by environmental notes. I read a newspaper that mentioned a public hazard in the toy store's giant head being loose. I assumed this was for a puzzle, but no, the bucket dome flies straight at you, requiring you to evade and maintain your position until it passes. This is all matched brilliantly with Nemesis hot in pursuit. The only reason I don't rank it higher is how brief the segment is compared to our next entry. Number 2, Stalker Nemesis. After a slight bit of calm in the opening moments, Nemesis demolishes the piece and Jill's apartment, leading to a chase sequence that, while on rails, felt very fresh and exciting at the time. These sequences do a great job of introducing the threat Nemesis poses and leads into the first segment of the game. By far the most open, you're given a small slice of land in Raccoon City to explore, with the goal of powering a subway to evacuate civilians. Once you power it on, Nemesis pops back in to say hello. In the one time I will compare him to Mr. Mr. X, imagine that threat on steroids. He chases extremely aggressively, punches in combos instead of single swings with long downtime, and will pop another spot seemingly at random if you lose him. He even turns basic zombies into ranged liquor monsters wanting to give you the suck. He drives so aggressively when he chases you that it caused genuine panic for me. In the chaos, I forgot to dodge as it wasn't an instinct yet. Instead, I tried to escape, but Nemesis don't play that. He will sprint like a rhino after you. It had me shaking in my boots. Anytime I saw him, I made sure to toss my heaviest explosives to stun him so I could make a proper getaway. Interestingly enough, it seemed you could actually win these ambushes, rewarding you with a care package of goodies for your trouble. I believe that's something from the original, and I love the concept. You can run to save resources or use them to battle to get a new reward, but either way, Nemesis won't let you off the hook easily. The pressure he puts on is amazing for the genre, and the game gives you fair tools in both weapons and dodging to handle what he dishes out. The final escape from him ends in a segment that corners you in a room with the only escape being a grate. You have to pull it off through 3 very slow animations, forcing you to stun Nemesis to allow for these windows. I'd offer praise for that as well, but I have to dock some points here on the basis I was able to explode red barrels in near point blank range, and not only survive, but stun Nemesis long enough that I was able to rip the grate off in one go. Even so, I was still panicking every step of the way, having the desired effect. All in all, this open segment of Nemesis surprise attacking you gave him an oppressive feel that was balanced well enough to feel fair, yet still scared the pants off of me. While I'm sure perfect dodging, explosives, and other environmental tools can make short work of him for experienced players, his entertainment value is quite high for a first playthrough. It was almost enough to reach the top, but those honors have to go to his Pyromaniac variant, meaning the #1 best boss in Resident Evil 3 is Pyromaniac Nemesis. At first, I was ready to roast this fight as quality up in flames stronger than the blasting I gave the Blob. After praising Stalker for his worthwhile pressure, this Pyro puts 0 effort into chasing you as you make a boring climb up a burning structure. It is so obvious how little danger you're in, something you shouldn't be able to tell in real time in your first playthrough. This was a clear indicator of the undesirable shift to cutscene clashes to come, but when you get to the rooftops to fight, it's a massive leap in quality. He uses a flamethrower against you, both shooting a lengthy stream in your direction and firing off a barrage of embers. If you catch fire, you'll take damage and have to deal with a momentary panic from Jill, stopping you from firing. To balance this highly offensive threat, it's powered by a fuel tank. Using explosive rounds from the grenade launcher makes quick work of it. I felt weirdly hesitant afterward to use ammo on him despite the defeat him objective, because I couldn't tell whether this was a raw damage deal or a puzzle sort of deal. That gave me time to see all the moves he had to offer, and they're balanced in excellent ways. He'll reach up and do a huge explosive slam, but it's matched by speed slow enough for you to evade, but not so slow that you won't get boomed if you're greedy. The arena is well designed to allow for breaks in his sight, has generators for you to use to stun him, but is small enough that careless running away can be punished by being cornered. He can also close the gap with a charge that is similarly telegraphed to the slam in a slow but not too slow manner, both of them offering nice recovery periods, encouraging you further to focus on evasion than countering. My dodging was still pretty shoddy, but it made the battle tense. I love the visual design. Hearing him shout "stores" throughout the battle is both awesome and chilling. There's a thrilling pleasure in finally facing him in a traditional boss fight after all the chases, and the balance of his mechanics feels perfect for its place in the game. Though the lead-in is underwhelming, everything else about this Pyromaniac amounts to my favorite Nemesis in Resident Evil 3. But of course, that's just my opinion. I'm really curious to hear how you all received his evolving battles over the course of the game, so don't hesitate to sound off in the comments. Last time you all gave me strong encouragement to give both Resident Evil 1 and 4 a look, so I'll be giving them a shot in the coming weeks. Until then, I want to thank you all for watching, much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.